Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nellie Tran. I am based out of San Diego, California in the United States, and I'm really excited to be here. I am the daughter of Vietnamese refugee boat people resettled here to San Diego. And my parents arrived here in the US 2 months before I was born. My mom was pregnant with me. And today I am a professor of counseling and school psychology at San Diego State University. So I think my story is, probably a very typical story, but one that is not told nearly enough. I didn't do well in school. I failed the second grade. My family tried really hard to help me to make it in American education, but they could only do as much as they were knowledgeable of. They were learning how to be American, how to go to school here in America, in the US, at the same time that I was learning how to do that. So then I ended up not getting into college or university, and I went to community college or junior college. And from there, I discovered psychology and the study of humans, and especially understanding how we end up how we are today, especially around experiences of racism and sexism and other discrimination experiences. And I went on to get my doctorate. I barely got into graduate school. Graduate school was really difficult for me. I feel like I experienced a lot of barriers in my process, but somehow I made it to higher education and became a professor, got tenure, and recently was promoted to full professor. But I think what I've done the most in my career is really to try to make education more accessible for other people who are like me. I think, our professor profession doesn't have a lot of diversity, and many of us who are in the academy feel uncomfortable sharing our story, thinking that we are special and thinking that maybe we don't belong here, that we're not smart enough to be here. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So I now spend a lot of my time and energy studying subtle forms of discrimination that college students, teachers, professors experience in the classroom, in schools, as well as in the workplace and counseling settings. And I develop intervention programs to try to reduce the extent to which people experience the discrimination, like subtle forms of discrimination. Because it turns out that when we experience things that are much more overt, big sexism, big types of racism, it's easy for us to be able to say, oh, that's just sexist or racist. So I don't have to think about how it might be me who's causing it to happen. But the subtle forms of discrimination is what I really focus on, because it's so much harder for us to be able to externalize or make it, understand how the world created this barrier. And it's not really because I'm flawed or I'm not a good person. And so I spend a lot of my time now making sure that mentors and professors spread that message so that more people like us can make it through education, knowing that, school is hard, college is hard, but it doesn't mean that it needs to it needs to be a flaw of who you are if you can't make it through school. So I've devoted a lot of my time and energy helping kids, through social media, through my day-to-day training, to see how they can make their education more representative of who they are, how they can, hold on to parts of who they are while they're still in training. As a U.S. born Vietnamese American, I think that's been the hardest part for me, is that when I started going to the universities, I stopped seeing people who look like me, and I stopped hearing things that felt like it represented what my family life was like. So I had this very different experience at my home as well as in school. And it felt as though school was the separate identity that I had to switch into this different version of myself in order to be successful. And it turns out, later in my life, I've kind of learned that when I do that, I'm missing half of who I am wherever I am. So then at school, I can't talk about my home life. And then when I'm at home with my family, I can't talk about what's going on at school. And a lot of that has to do with the language differences in these two spaces. But I think the more that we can help kids to bridge the home environment and the school environment, and the more that they feel comfortable to bring in their whole self, the more we'll be able to reach kids, and the more we can help them to achieve their greatest potential. And when we have a diverse faculty, when we have a diverse teaching profession, it's just easier for kids to see themselves in different capacities in the greater world. And I think that's what we're really about, is how do we help kids to reach their highest potential. And I think we know that, I'm also a mother of 2 young children, and my success, my ability to be successful, to strive for my dreams, will help them to see that it's possible for them in a way that I think we don't always see that with our professors. If we don't, if they don't look like us, if they don't have similar experiences to us. So it's been so important for me to talk about what I've been through in my life, and what my family has been through, as a product of war. It's so hard for them to know, um, what a good life could look like. This is more than they could have dreamed for me, but they they want to see me be successful. They want me to be happy, but I want them to be happy and comfortable. And I think we can do that because even though the world and war in particular is a never-ending cycle on our earth, what we have is the resiliency to try to get past that, right? That if I can be happy, and if I can strive for success, if I can give back, if I can show our children that there's a lot to live for, there's a lot to strive for, even though the world is not always in the best place, then I really do think that, my parents risking their lives to come to America to ensure that I have a future, that, we're just paying it forward every single time. So, so I think that's why I do what I do. I think that's why it's so important to talk about what we've been through, and to not just teach the content in school, but also to show kids that we are humans ourselves, and that it's okay to struggle in school. School is hard. There's a lot of barriers. There's even a lot of discrimination, but we come whole and we are capable of doing it. And I think some of my most recent work is really about uncovering some of the language that we tell ourselves around being the imposter that really holds us back. So my latest work has been about this idea that the imposter syndrome, or pretending to be something, that what we're learning now in the counseling world is that it's harmful to think that you're pretending to be something that you're not, because then who you really are doesn't belong here. And I think for a long time, a lot of us have thought that, right? That I don't belong here. So I must pretend to be the perfect professor. I must pretend to be the perfect student in order to be here. But what if we, went into this thinking, well, I'm not the perfect student, but I can be. I'm pretty good. I don't need to be the perfect student to be successful here. And that's now really what I've devoted my energy to, is to help students see that they are not wrong for being who they are. They are not less than. They come whole, and it is our job really to help cultivate and bring out the best in them. That empowerment has always been about helping people to see their full potential. It's not about putting power into people, which I think has been how the word has been used. And it's not, no one needs anything added to them. They just need the best brought out of them. So that's kind of the message that I have been trying to push for now. So that's who I am. That's what I've been up to.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story. I totally understand now your passion around students, young people, and reflecting back to them who they truly are when they start out in life. Your background, what your parents went through to bring you to the US, and for you to end up as a professor there in the United States is quite a feat based on what your background was like. So now you are in an academic position, you're working with young people all the time. What happens when a student is coming from an environment where they don't have the support, they don't have that the privilege of being cushioned? A lot of kids who are minorities don't have that. So where do you find that inner strength to know that you are whole, you are perfect, just the way you are? Give us a few tips and ideas for young people who might be listening to this interview.
Yeah, that's a big question. So I think of it in a couple different ways. One, I think is what you just mentioned, which is that, it's helping kids to know that they are whole, that they come to us already knowing a lot and having the skills that they need in order to be successful. It's now our job at the college or university or even in high school to allow them to learn the knowledge and additional skills that we know that they're capable of.
Yeah.
But not knowing that if kids come into this thinking that they are ready, that they are less than, that they are not worthy of being here, that's where the problem starts, right? So one is that cultivating the inner strength. And I think we do that in a lot of different ways. It's remembering where we come from, right? We are all successful products of our ancestors, right? We are all alive. That is a sign that we are successful, and that that means that folks before us have endured, that they have survived life on this not perfect earth, right? There's been our history books tell us that our people on this earth have gone through a lot already. So I think some of the, history can sometimes be used to make us feel bad, or to learn about some of the reasons why we're not as far ahead as we want to be, teaches us lessons about that we don't want to replicate some of the wrongs of the past. But also, it is a book of successes, right? It is a book of all the things that those who are alive on this earth have gotten through and passed. And so I often try to remind my students that they don't have to work hard. They've already survived. They are already what their ancestors wanted them to be. And that to remember to lean into some of the things that have worked for them in the past. And that can be different things for different people. For some people, it's, supports that they've had in the past, past mentors, friends. It could be spiritual, it could be religious, but that most of us have gotten to this day because we have strength in us. Right. And that this moment is hard, but that is what we are on earth to do, is to do hard things. And that to get to this point, you have already accomplished quite a bit. And I think then there's the opposite side of that, which is it cannot just come from within. We cannot do life's hard work without leaning into supports and structures on the outside. And a lot of the kids that I work with forget that those resources are here for them, right? That one, in college especially, you've already paid for it. So it already exists because you've literally paid for it. You deserve these resources. And secondly, I think along the way, we're often convinced that we're weak if we use resources outside of ourselves. And
Mhm.
that there is nothing further from the truth than that. Using resources, leaning into our communities, leaning into other people is some of the hardest things to do. And we know this because people don't do it, right? If we did it, if we all did it, then it wouldn't be so hard, but it is very hard. And I think, been tricked, right? I think society has tricked us into thinking that the only way to get ahead is to do it all by yourself and to do it alone. And there simply is not enough muscle on any one body to do anything alone. So you must lean into resources, must lean into people. We need to be with other people. You know, loneliness is a problem we experience a lot of in the U.S. And a
Yes.
lot of that is because we're afraid to connect with people on a deeper level. Because, and a lot of my counseling students will say, but if other people see the real parts of me, they may not love me.
Mm.
And I have to remind them that they can't love you if they don't know those parts of you. Like, what is love if they don't love every inch of you, the good and the bad, and everything in between? That no one wants to be loved by someone who only loves parts of you and not all of you. And in order to be loved for all of you, to be appreciated and accepted for all of you, you have to share all of you. That's
Yeah.
the risk, right? The risk isn't about taking a hard class. The risk is about coming into your whole self in this process and acknowledging when you need help and support.
Now, the whole idea with this podcast was to focus on the power of education. What would you say education has done for you personally as an individual to get to where you are?
Yeah. So I think one thing that was quite lucky in my upbringing is that my parents believed in the path of education. They saw this as one of the ways that they could get ahead, but it was also the way that I could be taught the things that they did not know how to teach me. And
Mhm.
so they did not have the privilege of going to school the way that I do because of, the state of Vietnam and its own government and war, that there, not a lot of people got to go to school. My mom is the daughter of farmers. So she got through middle school and that was about it. And I think they never let me forget that, that going to school was a privilege and that was my job. So I think I believed that this was my job and this is what I had to do, and that everything I didn't know I could learn at school, which is not true. But
Mhm.
I believed it. And I do feel like, schooling gave me a community of people that I didn't have before. And my family, we were all still learning how to survive and make ends meet in America. But here at school, I didn't have to think about that. I could really just think about, cultivating my thinking. It was such a privilege to just sit around and think, right? And so I was lucky enough to have that. And I think I was I'm a stubborn person. So that didn't my teachers didn't always love that about me, but once I got past undergraduate education, being a stubborn individual with my own thoughts really started to sink in. So, I always tell kids, if high school, middle school, high school, college isn't for you, it's probably because you have a mind of your own already. What you need to do is keep going, because
Mhm.
then once you get a doctorate, my doctorate is in philosophy. It's a doctorate of philosophy in psychology. So my job is literally to sit around and think about how we should think about human behavior.
Yes.
And so it's now I fit, right? The rebel in me, the stubbornness in me that knew the theories of the world did not fit people like me. I finally have thrived and found my place. And now I have found other people who are overthinkers like me, who are rebels like me, who want to, protest and go out and teach the youth new ways of being. I finally found my place. And for me, that was education. And I think I now know also that at the time that my parents came to America, we didn't have money, we didn't have education, we didn't have much of anything, we didn't have community yet. School was the only avenue I had. And I think for a lot of kids, school is one place that we can try to get ahead. And a lot of kids today have other ways of being successful, and we all ought to honor that, right?
Yeah.
Schooling doesn't have to happen just in our formal systems, but there's a time and place. And for a lot of kids that I've worked with, they may have gone off to build their own businesses, their own, beauty salons and small entrepreneurial, businesses. But then there comes a time when they know they want to learn something quickly, right? And so they
Mhm.
return for the training in business, in accounting. They come back for something that they want later. And that, I think, is perfectly beautiful as well. It's not to be tricked into thinking there's only one way to do education or learning, right? We want
Yeah.
lifelong learners. We have to know that using your brain for yourself and what knowing what you need right now is more important than following a
Mhm.
traditional path, right? So I really think that that's the purpose of education, is finding yourself and being privileged enough to be in a space where you get to think for yourself and have others really push your thinking and push the boundaries of who you can be. At least that's what I feel like. That's my goal in our training and in working with students, is for them to really see that you can be, in school you can be whoever, whatever you want to be, but
Mhm.
you have to do these X, Y, and Z things. Are you willing to do that? Are we willing to go down that path, together and get to where you want? You can't just want to be a millionaire, right? Most of us don't have the luxury of being born into that. But if you
Yeah.
want it, we can come up with a path that makes sense to getting there, right? And I
I
think
love
that to me is what education means: opportunity.
So, how do you see the role in education in addressing and mitigating subtle forms of discrimination, such as microaggressions and racial color blindness?
Oh, that's a big question. I think we have every role to play in this. And in fact, I think education should be the first place we address this issue,
Mhm.
because we're supposed to be the home of innovation and of new knowledge, of new ways of doing things. But we have to be sturdy enough to self reflect on what we've done well and what we need to do better. And I think that's the role we ought to play. That education should not be the place of perfection. We should not be the ones who are replicating things that have always been done well. We should be the test ground for how to do things differently, to be able to identify when things are not treating folks in the same way that we intended them to be. That we should be able to be innovative in how we teach students so that we are able to reach all students. We should be the ones who are identifying what types of behaviors, policies, regulations don't result in the same outcomes for folks. I think that's the research end of academia that really ought to continue to do that work. And then I think it's about teaching students to see that too, right? If they can see microaggressions and get angry for the first time in college, then it won't be the first time when it happens in the workplace. They will have tested out different strategies for how to deal with the emotional repercussions of experiencing discrimination, but also the legitimate workplace academic productivity kind of outcomes. And that's what I think is really important, is that college should be a test ground, not just for testing out who you're going to be and what jobs you want to be for the first time when you leave college, and internships. It should also be the place where you are playing with different coping strategies, that you are learning about understanding your experiences in different ways, and really trying to figure out what types of coping strategies work for you and which ones drive you more crazy. So I think this is the role that education should play.
Mm.
But I think education is very expensive, right? Higher education is, at least in the US, is very expensive because it's paid for mostly through loans or from people's personal income, which means people need to see this value quickly, or else they'll drop out. And I
Yeah.
think college professors and colleges in particular have not always been great at showing what is possible on the college campus because they're so invested in people graduating, which I think if we really focused on learning and cultivating critical thinkers, that would follow suit later. But
Mhm.
but we need to stay focused on what higher education was always meant to be, which is a place of innovation and a place for young people to try out adulthood, right? Try out so they don't that there is a soft landing place for when I've picked a coping strategy that really doesn't work for me. I've got time to come back from that before I
Yes.
enter the workplace and before I enter, I don't know, true adulthood.
The real world.
Yes, yes.
So let's talk about women in STEM for a minute.
Hmm.
What are the specific educational barriers that women in STEM face due to subtle biases? And what can educational institutions do to support and empower them?
So women in STEM are still one of those areas that are dominated. Well, STEM is still dominated heavily by men, and a lot of institutions now have diversified in the U.S. at least, diversified by race and ethnicity, but continue to struggle with the gender piece. And I think one thing that I think is interesting to note is that. This is true in the US, right? And this is true in a lot of places in Europe, and I imagine in Australia as well. But there are definitely countries where gender is not an issue in the STEM disciplines because women and men have the same expectations for math and sciences growing up. So I've experienced a lot of international students, women students actually, who come and don't understand what the big deal is. That why don't young girls here in the U.S. Like math? Like it's so easy. Why is it it's so straightforward. You just memorize and then you regurgitate. Well, I think that's because there is bias, right? And I actually see it a lot in my fifth graders classroom that the little girls in his class are already saying, but girls aren't good at math, so therefore I don't want to do
Mhm.
math. And it's almost it's like you're too young to know if you're good or bad at it. So there's already, and they're so gendered at this age already that they don't want to do anything that would make them stand out in a way that forces them out of the group. And so they will just conform to that. And I think one of the things that I think a lot of places are trying to do now is to catch those biases at an early age, right? To introduce math, numbers, science as just part of growing up and development, that toys need to be geared and marketed towards uh, people of all gender. Math is not something that only one gender does. And what I think, what we know now in education, and this applies, I think, across disciplines, but especially in the math and sciences, is that most women do think a little bit differently, a little bit more relationally, and a little bit more applied. So when we're learning math, we do better when things are applied to the real world, right? That certainly women in interior design, for example, are very math oriented in order to do in order to measure fabrics, wall spaces to be three-dimensional. These are all math concepts, but it's
Yeah.
easier when it is when you can see it in the real world. And one study that I ran early in my career had to do with these crocheted balls, and you can create hyperbolic planes, which is a type of math that we often see in calculus. It's a high level math. And if you teach kids how to crochet it, right? So you using yarn and a crochet needle, they can see this plane, this like 4 dimensional plane be
Mhm.
created. And so they end up remembering the math concepts better because they can see it, right? And that helps everyone. But in particular, it helps women to be able to apply the way that they learn, the way that they see the world, and that they can see how this math could be applied and how it could be a part of their identity, right? And I think that's the problem, is that in our kind of mathematicians world, we've often been told that mathematicians, people who are good at math and science, are men, and of men of European descent in particular. And I think there's been a
Yes.
big movement now for us to see that Math and sciences existed on every continent, right? Not just the ones that get the marketing today. And I think it's going to take a lot of us to bring those voices, those faces, and that knowledge to the forefront, right? That these practices that we have. I mean, you think about practices like practices like mindfulness or prayer or gardening and farming. All of these things require math and science. And so long as we can, put it back into these ancient practices that are thousands of years old, then all of a sudden we can see the diversity in the faces and the bodies that did, math and science. So I think that's where we're going with this.
So my last question is, what future directions do you see for research and practice in education to better understand and combat these subtle biases, and how can educators and policymakers work together to achieve these goals?
I think the most important thing is self-awareness. I think our planet will do better when humans are able to self-reflect on who they are and be able to be sturdy enough, whole enough to be able to accept their own flaws. Because the crux of doing subtle discrimination work is understanding and accepting that no matter how good of a human being you are still going to microaggress someone. You are still going to inadvertently be biased against other human beings. And that does not make you a bad human being. It makes you human, and that you are being a human by making a mistake. But the ability to acknowledge that you made a mistake, the ability to learn what you did wrong and how it hurt the other person, the ability to center the other person and in their pain and not make it about who you are, and the ability to then reconcile that, right? To come to terms, to make amends, so that you can restore a relationship. I believe that is where true education and learning will happen. When we have relationships, when we are feeling whole and cared for, we can learn anything, right? Some of us can learn some things easier than others, and some of us will require more help. But if we have the ability to talk to one another, understand one another's needs, and care that I want to learn something, I just can't because I haven't been given the tools and the skills prior to this, then I really do think subtle bias will become less of a barrier to success, academic success, workplace success, and productivity. But right now, those things that happen in the environment are still so linked to the outcomes, and that's the problem. We will never rid the world of subtle bias. It will always exist. Just the form that it takes will change over and over again. So it's this middle thing that we need to create. Right? We got to disconnect the mistakes from having it be so harmful to individuals, and especially individuals who are already the most marginalized and the most oppressed in this world.
Thank you so much. Wow, I could talk to you forever on this topic. Thank you for coming online and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us today. It's just been an absolute honor to have met you. Please keep on educating these amazing young minds. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. Her Story Circle is bringing you the voices and stories of women from all over the world to uplift, inspire, and empower you. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates, and join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making